Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel for what is likely to be the last video on this channel for 2023, which is absolutely wild. This year has just flown by. But what better way to end the year than to look forward to the new year and talk about some of the books I am so excited for coming out in 2024, and there's a lot. I managed to narrow it down to 20, which is still quite a fair few, but hopefully through talking about 20 books I'm able to share some releases with you that you maybe haven't heard about yet, or you didn't know were coming out, or authors you like that you didn't know had new books on the horizon, and you can get as excited as I am too. But as always, I'd love to hear about the books you're really excited for coming out in 2024 as well, because 20 books is not that many. There's probably more out there that I could also potentially enjoy reading. So yeah, let me know. And now that I've started talking, I'm realising that you might be able to tell that I have a bit of a cold. I think the congestion is audible, so I do apologise about that, as well as my slightly Rudolph-esque nose, but this is the risk we run in winter, is it not? So I've actually managed to section off all of the books I'm going to talk about into the months they come out, and that way I can go through them roughly chronologically. As always, these are dates that are currently available online. Sometimes dates can change, particularly for releases later in the year, and they are the UK release dates, so you know, it might be slightly different where you are, but hopefully this is still helpful. And without further ado, let's jump into January. So the first book coming out in January that I'm really excited for is a sequel, which probably explains some of my excitement. I feel like your top tier excitement is usually for sequels, right? Or books, I guess, by authors who you love and adore. But that is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. Now this is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is a sort of Victorian-esque historical fantasy set in a version of our world that is slightly different, in which there is an academic discipline that studies fairies, and not just in the like folklore abstract tradition sense, but in the sort of biological sense too, because fairies are identifiable, recognisable creatures that exist in that world that people have been able to study up close. Not to say fairies don't exist in our world, but I don't know of an academic discipline that studies them in the wild. And because this is a sequel, I obviously can't say a ton about what I'm expecting from the plot, because it would spoil book one. But for those of you who don't know, book one is about Emily Wilde, who goes off to a rural fictional country that appears to be somewhere in Scandinavia to study their local fae, and ends up slightly more entrenched than she expected to be. Some things happen that she was not able to foresee, and things end up a little bit more troublesome, and you also meet her fellow scholar at the university and see their dynamic unfolding. There's a like sort of light romance strain, although it's not primarily a romance book, at least that's not how I would describe it. And I loved book one. It was just fabulous, so naturally I'm really excited to see what happens next for Emily in book two. On the topic of fairy tales and folklore though, I do actually have a book on my list that comes out in January which is specifically of folktales, and I'm so excited for this volume. It's specifically called The Midnight Washerwoman and Other Tales of Lower Brittany. It's an edited collection that brings together 20 odd tales by the author Luzelle, many of which are being translated into English for the first time in this volume, which probably explains why I'm extra excited about this, because I might be able to read some folktales and fairy tales and myths that I've never read before. And I am really enjoying, and have been really enjoying over the past couple of years, reading more Celtic folklore and folklore from European cultures other than Greek and Roman. That's something I've been expanding my knowledge on and really enjoying. And the series that this book is a part of is a series I absolutely adore, because it does publish folklore from around the world in really interesting ways. There's a volume on like workers' folktales. It's edited by Michael Rosen. There's folktales from East Asia. There's various different books in this series. It's published by Princeton Press, so I always keep an eye on what they're coming out with. And when I saw this one, I was like, oh yes, need this immediately, pre-order, thank you. So cannot wait for that. Now the next book I want to mention is actually one that I wrote. I hope you'll excuse me for mentioning it here, but I am naturally super excited for it coming out. Like, there's no book I'm more excited for coming out, right, than something I've worked really hard on, and that is All the Violet Tiaras, Queering the Greek Myths by yours truly, Jean Mingus, and published by 404. This book I have mentioned in the past, and it's part of 404's Inkling series, which is a series I just like adore, like hands down adored it before I ever submitted a pitch to them. In fact, the reason I submitted a pitch is because I adored them so much, and they're like very niche little non-fiction books, and mine's is specifically about the role that Greek mythology plays in contemporary queer culture, specifically using the form of Greek myth retellings, queer Greek myth retellings, as a window into that. So the way in which readers and writers are either reclaiming Greek myths and making them queer, reimagining them as queer, sort of looking at queer themes in antiquity through their fiction, etc, etc, and what that kind of like means to members of the LGBTQ+ community, and the connections that we're able to find through those works. And this book was such a labour of love to write. I adored writing it, and it very much felt like it brought together a lot of different strands of my personality and my writing style and my interests. So I'm really excited for it to be out there, and for perhaps some of you to enjoy reading it as well. But finally, for January, I have a YA thriller mystery novel, and that is You Wouldn't Catch Me Dead by Tess James Mackey. Now, this is not going to be the last YA thriller / mystery novel you see in this video. I love the YA thriller mystery genre. It's probably my favourite genre within the YA age range. I find it really fun and entertaining to read. It has the kind of like scares and the mysteries and the it put you on the edge of the seat moments, whilst being really fast paced and quite fun, with characters you can like root for and get invested in. So I think it's like a nice balance, whereas I love adult thrillers, they feel quite different. So yeah, I'm really excited for a few coming out this year, and this is the first one. And this one is about Keely, who's recently moved to a new school. Her family have maybe been through something kind of traumatic, you don't know what it is, but she's moved locations and moved schools because of it, and she's planning on keeping her head down, just getting finished with school, until she ends up being roped into this sort of wilderness project. It's set in Wales, and they have to go out into the Welsh wilderness to do some sort of project for school, and then end up finding bodies. So things get a little bit darker. Is this connected to Keely's past? I have no idea, but I'm really intrigued to see how it all like melds together, and I'm really excited by the fact that it's set in the Welsh wilderness. Wales is somewhere I've never been, even though I live in the UK, and I've always wanted to go. So, you know, if in the meantime I can experience some of the Welsh wilderness through literature, bring it on. Okay, I told a lie. There's actually another book that comes out in January I'm really excited for, but it does come out January 30th, so that's my excuse for not remembering it's a January release. And that is The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This is actually a YA paranormal fantasy horror. I read another book by Crystal Sutherland this year called House of Hollow, which I really enjoyed. Like, it was a book I thought sounded interesting from the blurb, but it kind of blew me away with how much I loved it. It was like fae otherworld horror, but in our world, so like fantasy horror following a group of 3 sisters who went through something terrifying when they were children but can't remember anything about it, who then find that one of their sisters has gone missing in the present now that they're teens and in their early 20s, and it was just phenomenal. I loved the way it interacted with folklore. It was also partly set in Edinburgh, and I loved the links into like the Edinburgh landscape. It was just perfect. I thought it was wonderful, so naturally I was super keen to see if Crystal Sutherland had more books in this genre, only to find out that she had one coming out in January, which is very, very exciting. My interest is mainly based on the fact that it's by Crystal Sutherland, but it appears to be a kind of like serial killer plotline in which 5 women are dead, and one of our protagonists has a connection to one of the victims and is curious obviously about what happened to them, and then our other protagonist, because it's dual perspective, has a link to a demon. So it's also paranormal, and I'm intrigued to see where it all ends up going. Next up is February releases, and I have 3 of those to talk to you about. The first of which is a contemporary romance. Now, 2023 has been my like contemporary romance year. I did read contemporary romance prior to 2023, but I have really like fell head over heels with the genre in 2023, if that makes sense. Like, there's been different phases in my romance reading where I like primarily read historical, I primarily read fantasy, but I've really gotten into contemporary of late, and if you have any recommendations, please let me know, because I need more. For reference, I love Talia Hibbert, Nisha Sharma, Helen Huang, I can't remember off the top of my head, but those are all ones I love. So I've really like gotten into my stride with contemporary romance. I figured out what I liked and found some new favourites, as well as like continued reading authors that I'd already started. And there's a new contemporary romance writer whose debut I am super excited about coming out in February, which is Truthfully Yours by Caden Armstrong. So this just like plot-wise sounds phenomenal, and I also appreciate that it has queer and neurodivergent representation. I really enjoy a bit of queer rep in my... I mean, like, is it really a surprise? Before I finish that sentence, do I even need to say it? So this book is about Charlie and Paige, and the story essentially kicks off when Charlie's at a convention, and during a panel for a sci-fi TV show that she really enjoys, she asks a question that basically calls out the ableism of some of the cast members and some of the writing, and she gets shot down and made to feel tiny, and it's horrific. So she feels like she needs to like get away. She feels like she needs to escape, and she deserves some time away to just like enjoy herself. Now, Charlie is autistic and she's also bisexual, like I mentioned. We have bisexual rep in there, and when she gets to her little cozy Scottish holiday that she is taking, she discovers that the bookshop flat, like it's a flat above a bookshop that she's rented, is actually owned by the sister of one of the actors from the show. Not the one who made her feel really small and little, but his co-star Paige. Now, Paige actually thinks what Charlie did was incredible, and they start off on slightly rocky footing, but you know, it's a romance, so they're gonna learn to get to know each other and be there for each other and fall in love with one another in a little Scottish bookshop together, and it just sounds absolutely wonderful. It's an own voices book, and I cannot wait to read it. Next up, we have a collection of short stories, which is Your Utopia by Bo Ra Chung. Now, if you can read Korean, then you may have already been able to read this book, because this is the English translation that's coming out in February, but I am so excited for it because I read and adored Bo Ra Chung's other English translated short story collection. Was it last year? I think it was the year before, Cursed Bunny. It quickly became one of my favourite horror collections, and I immediately wanted to read more by the author, but there weren't more short story collections translated into English, so the fact that another one is coming out is just phenomenal. I obviously don't know much about this other than, again, it's going to be slightly horror, slightly speculative short stories, and Cursed Bunny very much dealt with themes of capitalism and patriarchy and sexism, so I'm wondering if maybe those threads will continue into Your Utopia, but I can't say for certain. I'm just invested because of the author. Then lastly, for February, we have An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson, and this is a dark academia romance set in a mysterious, prestigious college in Massachusetts. But more than being that, it's also partly inspired by the classic vampire novel Carmilla, and you may know S.T. Gibson from one of their previous works, which is Dowry and Blood, which was inspired by The Wives of Dracula. So there's a lot of themes of classic vampire lore woven through their work, and I just think this one sounds absolutely phenomenal. I mean, dark academia meets classic female vampire romance and queer rep. Yes, please, give it to me now. Now, I actually only have one book to talk to you about that's coming out in March, but I'm really excited for it, and it's another YA thriller. Specifically, Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Ayamide. Now, this is another author whose name you might recognise from her very popular YA dark academia novel, Ace of Spades, which had rave reviews at the time. It was really well received, and this book sounds absolutely incredible. It follows our protagonist Sadie, who up until this point has been homeschooled, but is now off to a very prestigious all-girls boarding school for the first time, and you know, she's excited and nervous and hoping that, you know, she can just like fit in like you do when you're at high school. I remember that. But instead of things going smoothly like she'd hoped, on the first night her roommate goes missing. So immediately there's a lot of people talking about her as soon as she arrives there because of this incident, only for things to escalate when another student turns up dead, and it sort of starts to unravel from there. Now, I do love a sort of like closed building, boarding school, university, murder mystery where everyone's kind of like trapped in the same building together. I really, really enjoy that. It makes me think of books like Truly Devious, so I'm really excited to see where this one goes. And that brings us to April, which I think ties for January with the most entries on this list because there are 5. Yes. So the first book is another one by an author and a YA thriller author who I already love and adore, and you may be able to guess what it is already, and it's Holly Jackson's new book, The Reappearance of Rachel Price. You probably best know Holly Jackson from her Good Girls Guide to Murder series, which I've been a fan of like since before it was cool, just saying. I interviewed her before the first book came out and like already loved them. I can't even take myself seriously. I really, really enjoy this series, and I've been reading them. I was reading them as they came out. All 3 books in the series. Absolutely adored them. I think Holly Jackson writes some of the best like paced YA thrillers with really fantastic kind of red herrings that keep you guessing all the way through, so naturally the fact that she has a new book coming out has me very excited. Now, the mystery, which is the title of this novel, is actually a mystery that took place 16 years before the events of the novel. We're now following our protagonist, who is 18 years old, but when she was 2 years old she was the only witness to the abduction of this other woman, and it's all coming, you know, like back up. It's a second chance thriller? What do you call these? Like a thriller mystery where it seems like it all happened in the past, but it's all coming back up now in the present. I really like those kind of stories. There's quite a few of my favourite thrillers which fall into that category of sort of the 2 timelines, or just like looking back on a sort of cold old case. So I'm excited to see what Holly Jackson does with that theme, and see where this novel goes. But while we're on the topic of YA thrillers, I thought I'd jump a little bit to the dark side with a YA horror slasher, another one of my favourite genres. I think because I was such an avid Scream fan growing up, and to me like Scream is the equivalent of a YA slasher horror as a film series, so books that do that I'm here for. And that is Dead Girls Walking by Sammy Ellis. And this book might actually have a little bit more in common with the more recent Scream films, because our protagonist is actually the daughter of a serial killer. Or at least that's what everybody believes. Temple, our protagonist, on the other hand, isn't quite sure. She's certainly not convinced that her father killed her mother, despite his confession, and decides to investigate herself by heading over to his farm property, which I think is where all of this happened, in search of clues. And I think things get a little bit intense from there, since this is a slasher horror. I mean, you can kind of guess where things might go. But yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm excited for the horror. Now, next up we actually have a graphic novel written by one of my favourite graphic novelists of all time, and that is Young Hag by Isabel Greenberg. If you've ever heard me talk about my favourite graphic novels and you've heard me mention Isabel Greenberg in the past, I absolutely adore her work, particularly 1001 Nights of Hero, or is it 101 Nights of Hero? I mean, I love it, because I can't remember the number in the title. Regardless, this one sounds phenomenal. It is inspired by Arthurian legend, Celtic folklore, tales of the otherworld, and you know, these are all things that I love. I love folklore, I love the otherworld, I love the legends of King Arthur and all of the cast of characters involved in that. So yeah, I'm just excited to see what Isabel Greenberg does with this. She really, really masterfully weaves classic fairy tale and folklore through her stories with really unique twists. At least that's what she's done in the past, and I think she really just sort of like honours the originals whilst breathing new life into them, and I love what she does, so can't wait to see how it comes to fruition in this one. Another one of my and now I'm just realising that apparently I can't count because that was only 4 books so Gave you the wrong number for January and the wrong number for April, but what can you do? Now, from April, we actually jump all the way forward to August. Naturally, as you get into the second half of the year, there's less set dates for books coming out, so it's a little bit more sporadic, the books on this list, but there are some, including 3 that come out in August. And interestingly enough, 2 of those are contemporary romances, so we're returning to that theme. And one of them is by an author who I've already mentioned, Nisha Sharma. So first up is Marriage and Mast by Nisha Sharma, which is the 3rd and final book in her If Shakespeare Was an Auntie series, which I absolutely adore. The first book in this series specifically was Dating Dr. Dill, and like with a lot of contemporary romance and romance series in general, each book follows a different member of a friend group as they find their romantic storyline. And in turn, each one very, very loosely follows the structure and plot of a Shakespeare play. So in this book, we're actually getting a vague retelling of Twelfth Night. Obviously, it's very much its own original story at the same time, but touching on some of those touchstones in Nisha Sharma's own really amusing, heartfelt, sexy ways. So she brings all of those things together. Now specifically, this is about 2 characters that you've met in the previous books who are friends with the previous love interests, whose lives just don't feel like they're going where they're meant to be going. They're not having the best of time, various things have gone wrong in their own lives, only for them to kind of be flung back together and come up with a fake dating storyline, which naturally turns into a real dating storyline. So I can't wait for all of the like humour and warmth that I've come to expect from Nisha Sharma's work. Then we have a debut romance novel, which is The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. And this one is actually an Own Voices Native American romance novel that I've been hearing a lot of buzz about and sounds absolutely phenomenal. Naturally, it's a romance, but it also deals with racism and discrimination of Native Americans in the USA. And specifically, our 2 main protagonists find themselves working for the same company and falling in love, but also going through their own like internal battles and struggles with the way they're being treated and having to overcome those, while also finding love with one another. So I cannot wait for this one. Then for September, we have a book I've been waiting on for years, yes, years, because it is the next book, the 4th book in Jessica Townsend Nevermore series, which started with the Trials of Morrigan Crow. This is a middle grade fantasy series, which is very much one of my favourite middle grade series going, if not just like one of my favourite like adventure fantasy series at all. I think it's so wonderful, so captivating, so imaginative, and I just like have been waiting for Silverborn ever since I read book 3 in 2020, I think it was. But of course, I'm more than happy to wait for a fantastic book, like there's no rush, but to hear that it does have a release date for September is very, very, very exciting. And then lastly, for this video, we have 3 October releases, the first of which is Cedric by L.M. Drew. This is a paranormal romance story, the second in the Bear Shifter series by L.M. Drew. So L.M. Drew writes generally paranormal romance, including the Gary Reeve Shifter series, which I've really, really enjoyed the books in. There's 4 at the moment, and I can't wait for more of those in the future too. But in particular, Cedric, like I said, is book 2 in the Bear Shifter series, the first of which was Owen, and I really enjoyed it. It was like a very endearing little small cold American snowy town, stuck in a log cabin, falling in love with one another storyline where, you know, the dude just happened to be a shapeshifter who could turn into a bear. It's funny because like the paranormal part of it doesn't really matter, but it's quite fun to have that included. It's more about obviously the dynamic and the relationship between the 2 leads, and we're getting the next in that series in October, which follows Owen's brother, Cedric. Then for the last 2 books I have to mention in this video, and the last 2 books coming out in October, they come out on the exact same day because they are part of the same series and they are edited by moi. So these aren't books that I wrote in their entirety, but they are 2 new volumes in the Macmillan Collectors Library series, which is published by Pan Macmillan here in the UK, and they publish both like classic novels and classic collections of poetries as well as like anthologies, and these are anthologies. So In the past, I contributed to Greek mythology volumes, specifically compiling like Victorian and Edwardian and Georgian, you know, a little mix of different time periods, retellings of Greek mythology. But these collections are specifically honing in on mythological themes, regardless of where they come from, and collecting together their stories from various different authors over various different time periods. Like, we have stories in these collections that date back to the ancient Egyptian civilizations, which have been translated from the originals, all the way up until like the 18 and early 1900s. And those are one volume on dragons, serpents and wyverns, and another volume on witches, wizards and sorcerers. So naturally you can kind of get a gist of what's included in both of these volumes, but I spent a lot of time reading and rereading folktales and myths from around the world, and picking out some of my favourites. I think demonstrated the diversity of these creatures and different themes around them in terms of folklore, some that you might expect, some that you might not, and they're all stories I think are phenomenally written and really, really incredible, written by loads of different people. And I've included along with them short introductions that give you a little bit of context to the writers and folklorists who collected them, and some of the themes and tropes dealt with in the story, as well as longer introductions to each volume, which just give a little bit of context of what dragons, wyverns and serpents are, and what witches, wizards and serpents are. So yeah, I'm really, really excited about these little volumes. I love all the stories in them. I think they're just fantastic, and it was a real pleasure to edit and bring them all together. So yeah, that brings me to the end of this video. Those are 20 books I'm super excited for coming out in 2024. I'd love to know if there's any books you're excited for coming out in the new year, whether they're books I've mentioned or they're books that I haven't. Please do let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, happy reading and happy Hogmanay. Bye everyone.